Hello, world history students. Miss Edelin speaking. I just want to stop right here and remind you that in the folder that has everything for Chapter 8 and 10.1 in it, you will find a question that goes with this video. The answer to that question is due before midnight, the night before class, when these notes are due in class. The notes are due in class, but you need to get that question answered before midnight. You will not be able to make it up. Just a reminder. Now, we were talking in class about how Rome fell, but only fell in the West. And we talked about the Byzantine Empire and Justinian, one of the greatest Byzantine emperors ever. Today we're going to revisit the West and talk about how Europe is going to rise as a place where civilization will be. But this period is known as the Low Middle Ages in most textbooks. It covers the first 500 years, basically, of the Middle Ages. And it's called the Low Middle Ages because we're struggling to rise up. We lack, and you may want to jot this down, we lack a central government. With Rome falling, people are not safe. Chaos reigns, and no matter how much you hear people criticize government, we know that if we want to be safe, we have to have somebody in charge, and that's our government, okay? So without further ado, this first slide is kind of referencing things you may already know. You may not need to write it down, okay? Just use your brains and don't write every single thing down that you see, okay? Basically, we know that Europe has been exposed to the Roman Empire. So they've got roads, they've got Latin language, most people are Christian. But Rome had ruled from the Mediterranean power, and so what we had in this European area are mostly these Germanic peoples who were loose, and they were still in tribes and only lived in small villages, so we don't have a lot of big cities that will be the focus of this history, okay? And Rome fell close to 500 AD. We're going to have some waves of invaders over time, and 600 is going to get hit pretty hard. You know, when there's nobody to protect you, that's the one thing you're looking for. You're looking for safety. And we will see the evolution of feudalism as a result of people looking for safety. They will make deals with people who can protect them. They will promise to serve in their army or make things for them, like if they're a smithy or a shoemaker or so on. But notice this, towns are definitely going to empty out. If you live in a town, you are a sitting duck for invaders. And as a result of that, trade is going to slow down and eventually learning will cease. Now, very wealthy people may have still had books and may have still had some education going on, but it's going to be very rare. And Europe is cut off from the places that are developed. In China and India, they're just going gangbusters. And even in the Middle East and Europe, not so much. They're definitely cut off from all this advancement. We are going to have the blending of cultures like we've seen over and over again. You're going to take the Greco-Roman, put a smattering of Germanic peoples in it, and then, of course, Christian traditions that developed. And this period is called medieval, which is just Latin for Middle Age. It's not a fancy term. It's just the period of time in between. A lot of times it's referred to as a dark age, although historians today say, no, there's too many advances that happened during this period to call it a true dark age. We're going to see Europe, the land, the geography, as a frontier. It's sparsely populated, it's very undeveloped, and it has untapped potential. I mean, in the beginning, it's going to be not used. These resources are going to be left to waste. We're going to have dense forest. We're going to hunt in there, but we're not going to really tap into the lumber and things like that right away. And all you have to do is think of some of the fairy tales, the Grimm Brothers stories that come about later on, and you can know how scary these forests were to people. Just think of the big bad wolf. We're going to have a rich soil, but we also have a really dense soil. Hard to plow with a little old plow that was plowing sandy soil down in the Mediterranean region. I mean, and we have the nearby seas for fishing, obviously, and eventually we're going to tap into these rivers to trade, eventually, once things get more stable, and we're going to use them for inventions like the water wheel. But not in the beginning. Like I said, it's an untapped potential. So let's talk about these Germanic groups. We've mentioned them so many times. Remember the Goths and the Visigoths and the Angles and the Saxons and all these different groups. Again, they lived in small kingdoms, and characteristics of these groups were that they were herders and farmers, very nomadic. They had no cities. They didn't have written law. Now, that doesn't mean they were lawless. It just means the law was not written, which means if you have a fickle leader, he can just change it to his whim. They did elect kings to lead in war, and then they would reward warriors who swore loyalty to the king with weapons and loot. Now, these last two bullets here, you might want to bracket off and put the word feudalism, because you can see the not only are people looking for safety, but here's the example of how people swore loyalty to the king. This is very much a Germanic tradition. Remember, we're going to have blending of cultures. Now, the strongest Germanic tribe was the Franks. What name is coming out of there, my dears? Right. The country of France is going to be named for this Germanic tribe. And the leader who is going to unite all the Franks was Clovis. Not only is he going to unite them, but he's going to conquer other tribes and take them into the Frankish tribe. Now, his other big thing is he's going to decide to convert to Christianity. He was not Christian, but most of his people were. And this was a huge political coup for him, because not only does he win over the favor of all his people, but he gained the ally of the Pope, the Christian church. So this was a very smart move, and Clovis will establish the Merovingian line of kings for many generations. Meanwhile, we have Islam being born in Arabia around 622 AD. And very quickly, the Muslim people or believers in Islam are going to build a huge empire. I'll show you a map in a minute. They're going to sweep across North Africa from Palestine and on into Spain. And they're going to threaten Europe, okay? They're going to be on the cusp of going into Europe until they meet Charles Martel, whose family, by the way, had moved up the ranks in the Frankish peoples. Now, let's take a look real quick before we talk about that battle. All this gold right here is the Muslim group or Islam, and notice how they take over Spain pretty thoroughly. And then follow this arrow up here to Tours. We're going to talk about Tours in just a minute. That is where Charles Martel is going to meet the Muslims and defeat them. Okay? So at the Battle of Tours in 732, Christian warriors triumphed. You might want to put led by Charles Martel. By the way, his nickname was the Hammer. I might use that as a bonus point on a quiz. So you might want to jot it down. To them, of course, to the Franks, this victory was a sign that God was on their side. And by the way, they held the Muslims at bay. The Muslims were not ever able to take over Western Europe, although they continued to rule most of Spain for many centuries. And by the way, they kept Spain very stable, these Muslims did, and advanced Spain in architecture and art and so on. The word for Muslims in Spain is known as the Moors. Now, here's a quick way to get a bonus. Are you ready? Message Miss Edelin and give me a nice little rhyme like Charles Martel defeated the Moors at the Battle of Tours in 732. Around 800 now, we're going to have Charles Martel's grandson, known as Charlemagne, which is just French for Charles the Great. His family's going to move up. Charles Martel's family is going to move up, establish their own Carolingian line, and Charlemagne's going to be a great leader who's going to help pull Europe from the ashes, okay, and get them on the way. Charlemagne took a play right out of Clovis's book. He aided the Pope by crushing a rebellion outside of Rome. And in gratitude, the Pope invited Charlemagne to his house for Christmas in 800 AD. And when Charlemagne was praying, this is how the story goes, the Pope kind of surprised him by crowning him and giving him the title Emperor of all the Romans. Now, Charlemagne supposedly was a very humble fellow. This is just a picture of him here. You can see by this picture depicted early on of who the artist thought had the power in this relationship. I'm going to just give you a hint. There's Charlemagne on his knees and the Pope standing tall. Who has the power in this relationship? There is significance for this crowning over time. What happened was the Pope set into motion some unintended consequences, and the impact of these consequences would be felt for centuries. So let's number these off. Number one, the Pope's going to revive the idea of a united Christian community like the Romans had. Everybody's Christian. It's also going to lay the groundwork for struggles, or you might even just put fights between popes and emperors. Again, who has the power? After all, the Pope is putting the crown on the emperor. Who's got the real power? And the Pope's action is really going to outrage, think about it, the Eastern Emperor, who all considers himself Roman. Okay? And now you're calling this guy Emperor of all the Romans? I beg your pardon, is what the Byzantine emperor is thinking. And this is just going to cause more problems between the West and the East. Now, Charlemagne did make an awesome empire. He tried to unify everybody with Christianity, and again, he's a humble man. It is not clear how literate he was. I think he could read, but he couldn't write. And he is going to spread Christianity to other places besides where he rules. He's going to revive Latin learning. He's going to establish his capital city as a second Rome. We already know that Constantinople is supposed to be the second Rome. And he's going to appoint powerful nobles, give them some land, work deals with them for their support. Again, feudalism, you can see that kind of playing in the background here. But the one thing, he's going to establish a central government for a while where he sends out these missi dominici, which are just like little spies who are going to check the roads, listen in case people have problems and make sure that justice is being done. The problem is here that when Charlemagne died in 814, his empire is going to soon fall apart. So we see that Europe's climbing out of the ashes, and it's going to be thrust back down because, first of all, his heirs are going to fight for nearly 30 years. Finally, his grandsons are going to draw up the Treaty of Verdun. Make sure you get that down. And they're going to divide the empire into 3 parts. Now, you and I know when you divide things up, do you make it stronger? No, you do not. There's the 3 parts they divided into, and then we're going to have waves of outside invasions that are going to continue to threaten Europe. And we're going to see Europe just thrown into chaos again. First of all, the Muslims haven't given up. They're still coming from the south. Then we have these new invaders called Magyar. Make sure you get these down. And they settled in modern-day Hungary. They're from modern-day Hungary, but they're going to attack Eastern Europe. And then the Vikings, you're probably very familiar with them. They're going to come out of the north. They're going to go down coastal rivers. No city on a coastal river was safe from them. They were horrible, the way they looted and burned places. Again, let's look at the map. You can see the Vikings in the purple up here. The Magyars down here in the green and the arrows that show where they came from. And then here's that big, huge Muslim area. All putting pressure on Europe again and throwing them into chaos. And that's where we will pick up our lessons the next time we talk. Please make sure that you answer the question in the folder for Chapter 8 and 10.1 that is right under this video because you have to have it answered before midnight. And work on your packet, and I'll see you in class.